Welcome. Welcome to another episode of The Impact of AI, sponsored by AI Time Journal. Each week, we explore how AI and cognitive technologies impact us daily, both professionally and personally. For those of you whom I've not met, my name is Melissa Drew, and I will be your host for this week's podcast. This week, we are going to deep dive into the intersections of predictive analytics, AI, and strategic sourcing solutions, which means in order to do that, we have to have the CEO and founder of BidOps, Edmund Zagorin, with us. So BidOps is one of the first companies to use artificial intelligence to fully automate the supplier negotiations. And through that, as a result, BidOps was the winner of the startup competition at Digital Procurement World and named Best Startup by the Shared Services and Outsourcing Network. Not only has that occurred, but I just found out before the recording that BidOps is also just won or recognized by Spin Matters as #1 value leader for sourcing solutions. And then finally, Edmund, you are also a part of the Forbes Technology Council, bringing your thought leadership through the Forbes digital network. Welcome.
Hey, Melissa, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that we notice is nobody's journey is ever a direct path nowadays. And what was interesting is that you started your career in philosophy and international affairs, wove your way through the university sector. I think you were part of a debate team or mentored some debaters, and then finally landed in the procurement area, which is where I assume how this fever of trying to fix some of our strategic sourcing solutions, sparked. Love to hear your story.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. I think no one's path is ever exactly straight in terms of the direction. And I started I went to the University of Michigan, and Michigan gave me a great opportunity to get a philosophy degree and to specialize in a study of complex adaptive systems. So I actually investigated the way that digital networks transmit information. I especially studied social movements. I had a great opportunity as a student to actually do research on major social movements, including Occupy Wall Street and the Arab Spring, which had happened at that point, and to see how, especially on Twitter, information moved through networks, and you saw emergent properties of systems, things like contagion, which of course we're all now familiar with from hearing about the global pandemic for the past couple of years. But those properties actually apply to information, how information moves as well. And if you hear about fake news or misinformation, there's some network effects that are linked to the spread of that actually are true of many different types of systems that exhibit the properties of complexity and emergence. Mm-hmm. So I had the opportunity to research that, was a member of the debate team in college, very passionate about that. Actually, followed that passion to become a debate coach at the University of Iowa, which is where I was made a procurement officer, had my first contact with a procurement system as a managed budget as part of the university, and had to, of course, adhere to stringent compliance guidelines, being an employee not just of a university, but also of technically a government institution as well. Mm-hmm. Now, what I realized in that moment was that this system was horribly broken and completely backwards in almost every way, and it really did not allow me, who was not necessarily focused on that. I was focused on running and building a great debate team as part of the university. And I was finding myself spending so much time on procurement activities that I became fascinated by this problem statement and began doing research and policy analysis. Eventually, that turned into joining a startup in San Francisco that was focused on data science and managing complex analysis of purchase orders, and really just fell into a passion for the activity. As a consultant, I began working with large health systems and multinationals, really designing multi-phase strategic sourcing processes, complex negotiations, and actually executing reverse auctions. So my entree into that was really just learning how to work with data, learning how to work with large data sets, and then helping companies manage complex interchanges of data. Of course, data is much easier to manage if it's within your four walls, and if it's with a supplier as well, or many suppliers, the challenge in managing that data can just be very quickly become super complex and hard to deal with. So that was really where I found that there was a lot of passion. And what I really love about procurement is that there's so much power and intention wrapped in the money that businesses spend. And there's so many ways that affects the world and transforms the world that we live in the built space. So if you look around you right now, any room you're sitting in, everything around you almost has gone through a procurement process at some point. And most of us in the rooms and institutions that we occupy, we're very unaware of how these procurement processes operate as selection cycles to select the different items that exist in the materials and the physical structures around us. And as we think about the businesses we build, our businesses in a lot of ways are sets of services that we pull together to deliver value for our customers and also to create operating models that allow us to, of course, deliver great experiences to our employees and our team. Those are also, in many cases, delivered by third parties. And so what I realized, the processes that select for those third parties and then manage the life cycle of our relationships are incredibly important. They're only becoming more important to the way that modern businesses run. And so that's really where I felt artificial intelligence could remove some of the repetitive tasks and some of the bottlenecks that prevent us from making great partnerships and really enable some of the best practices that some of the greatest companies in the world are using with their supply chain and enable that for any company in the world to access.
Love it. I am a huge advocate. I also come from a procurement background, both on the buy side and sales side, but I've always recognized that no matter how many tools that we put inside our procurement organizations, there's always these still manual tail end processes that we can't seem to automate. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because I also believe that with the emergence of cognitive and artificial technologies, we're now going to be able to have the ability to plug up those manual pieces, those repetitive tasks, and really free up everybody to be exactly what they should be, strategic, more value-based outcomes, focused on the decisions, not sitting there pushing a button that needs to be pushed every single day, which is where you come in. Yay! So tell us about your company and tell us what problems your application is solving.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, completely agree with that. I mean, working in procurement and assisting procurement teams from an enablement standpoint as a consultant prior to founding BitOps, I saw this challenge on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. I don't really think that, and for the many procurement managers, category managers, procurement operations leaders, and CPOs that are part of our customer network and are just personal friends, I can't count among them a single one that would stand up and say, I enjoy making pivot tables. I enjoy responding to long email chains with multiple versions of the same spreadsheet updated over the course of weeks and months. I cannot count a single person that really enjoys that part of the process. What people do love to do, in my experience, is using data to make decisions, building great supplier relationships, and being a strategic partner to units within their business that are trying to achieve great things. And so to a great extent, we take the objective of procurement technology, of course, to enable high-performing procurement teams. And high-performing procurement teams, in our view, do three things. They influence a ton of spend. They provide a great customer experience, their internal stakeholders and business partners in the different departments. And they make sure that they're optimizing for the best possible outcome for the business while still delivering repeatable cost savings to finance. And if they're able to do that, that's a really world-class. And so customers of BitOps are able to influence more spend. They're able to deliver a great, fast, quick outcome to their stakeholders with a good result. They're able to deliver savings, repeatable cost savings to finance, and they're able to create the best overall outcome for every project they touch. Now, you're probably wondering, well, how is that possible and how does AI play a role in it? So in order to understand this, we have to really we have to go down in the weeds for a second and talk specifics. The number one problem in procurement is there's too much manual data entry. And 90% of the problems in procurement come from poor data quality across the board. Poor data quality when it comes from the quotes, poor data quality when it comes from comparing the specifications and the description, matching the part numbers across different systems, too many systems, data fragmentation, and as a result, poor data quality. And that poor data quality slows down the process at every single step. So what BitOps does is we have a simulator, and this simulator simulates a procurement process before it begins. That activity could be a request for quote. It could be a request for proposals. It could be a negotiation, multi-phase negotiation, very complex negotiation. It could be a very simple negotiation. It could be done by text. It could be done purely quantitatively. It simulates that process before it happens. That simulation creates a idea of where the procurement activity is going to come out. And that can be used to programmatically score and grade the different values that are entered in the database as part of this process. So you can think of procurement as a stream of data that almost works like a game of telephone, and you're handing off, you're kind of whispering the person's ear, they're whispering the next person's ear. And so what ends up happening is you have that process takes a really long time. If you ever played telephone, usually you don't get the same thing at the end as when you started. Yeah. Right. So that's essentially what most corporations are doing with their supply chains. They're playing games of telephone. As a result, they wind up with poor data quality. That's not, by the way, anyone's fault, right? We shouldn't feel guilty or kind of bad about the fact that data quality is so bad. Because you look at the game of telephone, even world-class people, when they play that game, they're not getting the same thing on one end as when they started, right? So that is the intrinsic problem that we're all facing in the procurement supply chain profession. Now, how do we solve it? The simulation is it's able to figure out what is going to be at the end, the last person in the game of telephone, as what the first person said. And by doing that, instead of asking for a quote and ask people to manually type in all of these different form fields, which is a total drag. And by the way, that's a process that doesn't get a whole lot better with software. We keep hearing about, software this, software that. Right. If you have software and you still have a ton of manual data entry, process is not that better. Okay. If you have a process that radically reduces the amount of manual data entry, you're going to wind up with a faster process, better quality data. You're not going to be playing the game of telephone. And at the end of the time, you're going to be able to deliver on high performing procurement. You're going to influence more spend, shorter cycles, repeatable cost savings, better outcomes for the business, and great customer service for your internal stakeholders and business customers. So what BitOps did is with our simulation, we don't just kind of sit back and say, abstract simulation, right? It's an academic thing. No, we enable the simulation to orchestrate a conditionally logical workflow that actually enables you to interact with your suppliers in a repeatable, predictable process. And for that repeatable, predictable process to enable your best supplier interaction, whether it's requesting a quote, finding a price, getting a PO, PR, purchase request, purchase order, doing a supplier management activity, getting a compliance activity. We enable every time you do that, we want it to look more like the best time you ever did it. That's our goal. So we are making your every activity you have with a supplier, it is the optimal or moving towards that optimum interaction with the supplier. Now, how do we do this? We use a framework that is ubiquitous in procurement. It's full. And by the way, we do this when BitOps says this, fully automated. It's built into the system. We call it predictive procurement, right? Predictive procurement orchestration. So we're building where it's not just the simulation, it's actually orchestrating that workflow. And we analogize it to self-driving cars. We want procurement to be in the driver's seat, but not having to touch the steering wheel, right? You're getting that smooth ride. We want software that uses itself more and more and learns from your best people's best practices. And so what that's doing over time is it makes your best interaction for any type of task you have with a supplier, whether it's evaluating a quote, requesting a quote, whatever it is, getting a proposal, to look more and more like the best time that your best person managed that process or interacted with that supplier. And it's self-driving, which means you don't have to intervene in that process except to correct it, but you're aware of it and you still have the ability to grab hold of the driver wheel and turn the car if you don't like where it's headed. But we just believe at the core, deep down, manual data entry and the poor data quality in procurement and the fragmentation of data across different systems is not working. It's not working for major companies. And the biggest companies in the world have this problem. And they've invested hundreds of millions of dollars trying to solve it over the past 20 years. Yeah. And they have not made a measurable difference in this fundamental problem. You look at procurement 20 years ago, it's funny. There's actually an image of the first RFP and it's on a clay tablets from Hammurabi's Babylon. It's for like 20 bushels a wheat,
Yeah.
right? Okay, how do we know what the price should be? Let's ask 3 different people what the price of 20 bushels of wheat should be and see if we get the best price and they're going to deliver it on time and a couple other things. And, you know, that process has not changed. BitOps, in my view, and I could be overstating it, but I think I'm reasonable in saying this. We're the first major innovation to the process of businesses exchanging information about prices since Hammurabi's Babylon, since that moment where the people said, what should the price of wheat be? And that process of having a simulation generate the price instead of that process of requesting and comparing, that changes how companies are able to access the market, how they're able to build supplier relationships, and it changes the way that they're able to interact with their supply chains and to deliver value to their internal stakeholders and their finance organizations to deliver repeatable, predictable cost savings.
Right. So let's peel back the layers just a bit. You mentioned that all of this, I mean, you talked about data. A lot of these simulations you're talking about have to be because of the data that you've collected, correct? So let's talk a little bit about where that data is. Where are you pulling that data from? And if I'm someone who's like, wow, this sounds really cool. If I understand you correctly, you're saying that we have all the data there so that you technically don't need to keep going out as a sourcing professional and go out and get more data from your suppliers. Is that how I'm connecting the dots here?
So here's the thing, is that there will always be a need for procurement professionals and suppliers to reach agreements.
Okay.
Because fundamentally, agreements are the product of human commitment. And what we want from our supply chains is we want commitment for service levels and pricing that matches our desired expectations. And if we get that, we're doing a great job, right? Right? Like, you know, you can't ask everything from procurement, although a lot of people do. You know, and on the supplier side, what they want, and ideally, right, if you're a seller, and I think this will resonate with anyone who's ever worked in sales, you want high order forms, but more than that, than revenue, you want predictability. If you're a great salesperson, you want to know you're going to make your number higher. And if you're a really great salesperson, you know when, right? And so if you think about that, take that on the procurement side. We want to know when we're going to make our numbers, and you know, if we're you know, able to be world class, we'd like to be able to change things and have levers to influence that.
Right.
And so it all comes down to that fundamental paradigm: influencing spend, delivering a great customer experience to the internal stakeholder, and managing those activity patterns so that each activity pattern looks more like the best version of what it could be.
Right. But peeling back the layers, I'm the first time I'm using your system. I turn on and I utilize the simulator. Where's that data coming from? Is the data already there in the system?
Yeah. So let me tell you a little bit about how we got started with BitOps, because I think it'll probably be illustrative. So you'll notice if you look at our corporate history, we were founded in 2017. We didn't really release a product until 2020. We had a couple of people that were doing initial close customers that we did some tests and experiments with in 2019, 2018. But we didn't release our platform until 2020. We released it right in the pandemic. Great time to release a product, right?
Yeah.
So what were we doing for the first like couple of years, right? We were building the world's largest, richest data set of quotes.
Got it. And
what we did during that time is we not just built that data set, we also analyzed some really interesting patterns in this data. One thing that we realized, which is a common misconception, so most procurement professionals believe that each category has such major differences. And, you know, we look at the major categories. In direct procurement, you have spare parts, ingredients, chemicals, metals, you have energy. In some cases can be direct or indirect. You have in logistics, you have different modes of freight. You have your carriers, you have your ocean freight, you have your intermodal rail, et cetera. You have packaging as a whole category unto itself in procurement. You have, you know, of course, you have the indirect categories: consulting, IT, marketing, right? You have all of these categories have their own nuances, right? And the people that are really, really sharp in the procurement world, they know their categories and they know the value of their categories, and they know the value of hiring great people to manage their categories and think about their categories in a proactive way so that they're getting ahead and staying ahead of what's happening in the market for their categories. Mm-hmm. Now, because of that, there is a common misconception that the data for these categories is totally different and irreconcilable.
Right.
Now, what we realized in building this, massive data set of different quotes, is that the patterns between different categories are actually incredibly similar. And I'll tell you a pattern that most procurement professionals are aware of to some degree, which is the Pareto pattern, which is that in certain bills of material, 80% of the money is 20% of the line items. Right. That's a very, very common pattern. Right. So that's something they teach procurement professionals when you go for your CPSM or your other professional certifications. They teach you this. This is a pattern to recognize and look for. Why? Because if you can manage a category by only looking at 20%, then you can deliver a huge amount of impact with less effort than you would otherwise. Mm-hmm. And you have a long tail and so on. Well, guess what? That's not the only pattern. There's tons of patterns in this data. And one of the patterns that we recognized was that the number of suppliers that you have for a different transaction actually will deeply influence the price that you could reasonably expect to get. So that's an input that goes into our simulation. So we do, when we were training our machine learning model, we did classic back propagating or retroactive prediction. So we actually went through and said, could you predict a quote? We already knew what the answer was. So it helps us learn if the model is good at predicting.
That's very common, by the way. Just for everybody that's listening, that is very common that when these models and predictive analytics are being developed, to use retrospective data, which is what you just highlighted. Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. And what this data did is it allowed us to not only build a great machine learning pipeline in terms of deploying experiments and being able to get kind of rapid iteration, but it allowed us to really look and build a category agnostic model. And the reason a category agnostic model is so important is that it can simulate the effects of competition on the price of any item in any bill of materials or in indirect categories, any rate card or any anything with a unit of measure. It can simulate that effective competition. And as a result, it's a very powerful model when you're bringing together your data across your procurement purchasing, and you want to do things like do all your KPI tracking. You want to track your purchase price variance. You want to see, okay, I'm using bid ops, but kind of what am I getting? How is it moving the needle on some of these key numbers? Mm-hmm. You're able to see that in real time. And you're also able to baseline at the item level every category. So item level, supplier level, category level, project level. And that's, by the way, you need to do that if you're going to be able to ask the question of your data, is this the best possible version of this transaction? A question a lot of procurement people ask by saying, am I leaving money on the table when I talk to a supplier? Am I leaving value on the table when I'm running a process? So this helps you make sure that at very least, you're able to scale the best version of every transaction and harness the wisdom of crowds from your best people who are managing those categories across your procurement organization.
As you've built up this data and you've looked at, by looking at retrospective data, you're helping to validate, because we all talk about, okay, we've got a lot of data, we're looking at from multiple sources, making sure that there's no bias, making sure that it's trustworthy. And what I hear from you is that validation that, yes, we have gone back really for the last 3 years and took a deep dive to make sure and validate that as we run through these simulations and these scenarios, we are getting the outcomes that we expect, and you're able to explain where the data is coming from and how you got to that decision. So that's really good. I appreciate you being transparent with that. But now let's move a little further, where now the system's out, it's running. The governance model that you have around your data, are you also constantly looking at tweaking those models or adjusting the models or adjusting the data so that the results are consistent with the more and more, customers that are using them?
Yeah, I mean, we always have to be continuously improving, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no you can't even rest for a second in this business, right? The world moves very fast, and the technology stack is always continuously changing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very hungry for that, because what's happened now is the ability to bring in third-party firmographic data into the model at the supplier level. So we not only do we produce a lot of data, and of course we help customers make sense of their own data that they already have sitting around oftentimes different disconnected systems. We also buy a lot of data. So we buy data on our suppliers, and we have a vast tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands supplier network globally, in concentrated in North America, Europe, Asia Pacific. We have some coverage in Africa and the Middle East, and we have a lot of coverage in Latin America as well. Not so much in Antarctica or other places, but what we realize is that these suppliers, what our customers want to know about them is they typically like to know when they were founded, the revenue they did last year, the kind of information about their credit worthiness or their financial risk, and they also like to know their cybersecurity risk, kind of what systems are they using, all of that stuff. All of that data can be bought from third parties that have validated, gone through that validation step. So what we do is we're taking that data in, we're developing now correlations between supplier attributes and price predictions. So we have the largest data set, not just of historical quotes, we have the largest data set of price predictions, which is by itself like kind of an interesting thing, because price predictions, by the way, they're not always correct. And anyone who thinks that they are has never read a weather report, right? You read a weather report, weather report's going to tell you if it might rain tomorrow, and if it's 90%, you probably bring an umbrella, and if it's 60%, you probably ignore it.
Yeah.
Right. So what we know about the price predictions in bid ops, and this is kind of what we go into active learning and how it continuously refines itself, is many of bid ops customers use an optimized procurement process. I mentioned this kind of fundamental transformation of procurement. So it used to be that you would ask for a price. Using bid ops, your AI is suggesting the price for both parties, and you agree on that. We actually get to see what the supplier quoted. So we actually know whether or not the prediction was correct because it's rendered as a suggestion within our workflow. And if the supplier accepts the suggestion, then it's like, okay, good job, model. You did it right? You got the suggestion right. Supplier actually accepted it. And if they say, no way, Jose, that price is way off, here's what it actually is, and here's our quote, and take it or leave it, then the model is like, oh, okay, I can improve, right?
You've now got a new data point.
That item level is actually back propagated in the model, and that model becomes much smarter from every time the supplier is interacting with the price suggestion. But so it's a recommender system that becomes smarter based on the acceptance, like all recommender systems do, like your recommender system in Netflix or Amazon or any of these other systems. A recommender system is a way of it's a user experience for deploying the results of this kind of set of predictions historically. What
I also believe I'm understanding is that it also acts as a level of indices. So, for example, if I'm out there, buying paper is one of those commodities that it fluctuates. You've got, 4 paper companies out there, and if 3 of those 4 paper companies decide to increase the rate, then everybody, in that paper industry is increasing their rates based on those 4 original manufacturers. So what I like about what I'm hearing is if I'm out there using this tool, I'm going to have that information there for me. I don't have to go find it. I don't have to ask the paper company to give me a confirmation that the, piece of paper that says, yes, we really are, increasing the rates. And by the way, so the other, I think what I'm hearing is it's more of the information's coming to me. I'm not having to pull teeth to go get it. And then when I do pull teeth, I don't know if that's the right information based on just what you said. You pushed this out in the middle of COVID. I'm sure pricing last year was completely different than, where it was 2 years from now or where it's going to be, 2 years ago. So I love what I'm hearing. And am I understanding this correctly?
That's 100%. And what I would say is that the, predictive procurement orchestration is all about making sure that you have some sense going into a transaction of what to expect on the other side. So you're not playing that game of telephone.
Right.
And as a result, like you're talking about with COVID, pricing changes in the market, we're simulating the price right before it happens. Right before it happens. And by the way, anyone who tells you they can predict the price of something like a month or a year from now is pulling your leg, right?
Yeah.
It's just, there's so much noise and there's so much we don't know. It's kind of like the relationship between meteorology and climatology. In aggregate, we can predict changes in climate. In specific, we can have some idea of the weather next week. We're not going to predict the weather a month from now. We're not going to predict the weather a year from now. We might have some sense of what forces in the climate are doing, but those forces actually have no relationship to the weather on a given day of the year, which is one of the interesting things when you look at large data sets. You see that specific examples, which are of course for us easier to make stories out of, are not very rarely are they representative of a specific interaction pattern or pattern within the data. The other thing I'd say is that you think about, the way that, procurement kind of has been done. And I'd go to your paper example, right? You talk about, okay, we have paper, we're buying paper. We've got some original manufacturers that have changed the price or they've changed their configuration. Now, here's what I'll tell you is that contrary to most people's perception, so most people have the perception, oh, it's something crazy happening in the market. As a result, the price has changed. I want to actually challenge that for a second because our data has shown that's not true. Now, here's why. If you think about it, the product of paper next month and the product of paper next year and the product of paper for 3 years are totally different products. They're totally unrelated. And the reason is that as a supplier, if I know that I have stable sales for 3 years, I can commit production and I can commit volume in a way that I can't for an order that's going to be a one-time thing that's coming next month. And so what procurement is able to do when it's really high performing, and I mentioned, right, repeatable cost savings, great customer experience, able to deliver projects on time, et cetera. What procurement is able to do for its suppliers is it's able to make a repeatable exchange. And that exchange is for the value of predictability in exchange for cost savings. And scaled up, what that means is that the market forces of these original manufacturers shutting down production or raising their prices actually has very little effect when you introduce the game changer of predictable, repeatable orders. What you're able to do by aggregating and leveraging buying power at scale, the market forces in our experience. And by the way, it's funny, a lot of our customers have analysts that will put in predictions for how much money these sourcing cycles are going to save. Not a one has ever been right when it comes to bid ops, right? We save companies like millions or tens of millions of dollars in just a few months, and we don't have to integrate. We don't have to get spun up. We're not like have to connect to the ERP. We save millions or tens of millions of dollars in just a few months just by running these orchestrated autonomous cycles. And those cycles are based off of this model, this simulation, this price prediction. And as you might guess, there are people that will say, oh, we'll have an analyst analyze the market and guess what the price is, and we'll compare it with bid ops. And not a one has never been correct. And the reason is because market forces do not affect the negotiating power of suppliers anywhere close to what you've heard or been told.
Say that again.
So think about it. Let's imagine I'm buying something from you, and I'm going to give you 3 options for how I'm going to buy it. I buy it once from you at $100. I'm going to buy it every month from you at $100 every month. I'll guarantee that up front. I'm only going to pay you each time I buy it though. And I'm going to buy it for the next 3 years for $100 every month. And I'm going to guarantee that. Now, if the market for your thing is like, you're only making like say a 5% margin today. Okay. Then you might be like, well, this is kind of a crumb deal. Like I'm not right. I'm only making $5 off this deal. That's not really all that great. But if you're able to go to your suppliers and say, hey, I got 3 years of orders for this thing, I need you to get the price down. And by the way, I'm willing to guarantee that. Then their suppliers are often able to say, wow, okay, we're able to guarantee that too. So it allows your suppliers to reduce their costs by introducing predictability down the chain. And the other thing that it's able to do is it fundamentally allows you to access a different class of product. Because the product of this thing tomorrow or this thing next month versus this thing over a 3-year period, 2 totally different products. Easy to get confused because it's the same thing. They're 2 totally different products because predictability itself is a feature of the product.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Let me ask this question. So I've gone through your tool. I've got my simulation. I use that to make my decision. I'm going to go with this vendor. I then get into the contracting phase. And in the contracting phase, because I'm doing a long-term, we'll say in your example, 3 years, there's additional nuances in the contract that says, if the price increases in year 2, we will only increase up to X%. If for some reason we, come back and we want to increase the price in year 3, we can only increase X%. So your tool, does it capture those nuances after the point of the award during the negotiations when that final agreement is assigned? Because I would think that that's now additional variables that could be applied into your models.
Melissa, let me tell you something. BidOps is the most sophisticated procurement tool on the market. So not only does it capture, not only does it capture things like markup in the second year of the contract, it captures Incoterms, shipping and logistics charges. It captures surcharges from fuel if the price of fuel goes up.
Awesome.
It captures, you can do variable milestone-based costing. You can do market baskets. You can do markup discounts. You can do any type of costing that would happen in these types of negotiations. You can do in BidOps. And let me tell you something else, which is we often hear from people, okay, well, we do a lot of indirect services. It's much more about the relationship. It's not really about price. So how valuable is predictive pricing to the relationship? And from our perspective, if predictive pricing is not valuable to the relationship, that's all the more reason to automate it, right? If it's really not valuable, then why are you spending valuable hours of your team's time making sure that it's aligned? And if it is valuable, then let's make sure it's done in an intelligent, orchestrated, autonomous way that harnesses best practices to deliver a great outcome. And a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, okay, it's really about the relationship. We have to sit down and hash it out. Amazing. Why let a spreadsheet and a long email chain get in the way of that great conversation that you're going to have with your supplier? Why not make it about relationship building and strategic partnerships and, what we can do together down the road, and not have them spending time filling out form fields in a spreadsheet, which, let me tell you, can delay and even damage the conclusion of a productive supplier agreement.
Right. I think it's easy to connect the dots that if I'm not having to constantly go out there and get the data, because I think, I'm always advocating that data is the heart of the organization. And without the data, there's so many things that we can't do. And what I'm hearing from you is that you've done a lot of that upfront work. You've pulled that data in from how many different sources did you say earlier?
Oh, I mean, hundreds of millions.
Yeah, all the data that we particularly go out to. And what I've heard is, I don't have to do an RFI. I've got that supplier information there. I don't have to go out and fill out a risk assessment or a risk form. Or I think what I'd love is you're not having the supplier fill out a 300, questionnaire, which I still don't understand why we still have people do that. But I think that's where folks who haven't bought in yet, to the infusion of these cognitive technologies with our traditional, procurement and sourcing practices, I think they're just still lingering there on the border, just waiting for everyone to say, no, guys, this is really awesome. You should be doing it. I definitely see the value in this. Before we started recording, did you say this was patent pending or patented?
This is patented technology.
Patented technology. So I think for someone to come out, because I read your website and the website was very clear that you are the first. And I wasn't sure I wanted to echo that, but with a patented technology within a traditional sourcing platform that really takes it to the next level, yeah, I can definitely see why that sentiment is out there. It makes sense. Yeah, congratulations, by the way. Patents are getting more difficult to get a hold of lately. Is there
Thank you.
something
Yeah.
specific you want to mention about your application? Because I mean, we could belabor what's already on your website, which I'm not going to do, but in really differentiating the fact that you've got this patented technology, that's really the differentiating factor.
Yeah. I mean, I think just to keep it simple, it's about the 3 Ps of predictive procurement.
Mm-hmm.
Predict, prioritize, produce. You got to have some sense of what the target is and how to measure success.
Right.
You got to prioritize based on business impact and those 3 things, right? How to deliver great outcome to the business, repeatable, predictable cost savings, and making sure we're getting the right stuff at the right price for the right person, right? And we got to produce. We have to deliver. It's not just about, yes, data is the heart of everything, the heart of the business, but if it doesn't produce business results, it probably shouldn't be at the top of the list, right? We have to deliver great business results. And now more than ever, procurement is on the front lines. So we're all have seen the supply chain chaos over the past few years. It's affecting every industry. And procurement has a unique opportunity in my mind through technology to become a strategic weapon for any business that has a high performing procurement team. Procurement is going to become part of the operating model of that company. And so I really believe that the future of procurement is upon us. And if you wanted to build a high performing procurement team by yourself with no technology, you could hire analysts and they would simulate everything before it happens, right? You can do this in Excel. You can build a set of linear regressions, simulate.
Yeah, but the amount of time it would take for them to do that, exactly what you just said. I used to do that long time ago, back in the 1990s, and I was up working at least 90 hours a week manually trying to do some of just a portion of some of the things that you've mentioned, and it would take me a total of 9 weeks to do it. So yes, you could say that you can hire analysts, but if you want that high performance team, 5 analysts are still going to spend 9 weeks trying to get to the same level of confidence that your application can get you in a much quicker time. I think that's where that starts to differentiate. Yeah.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, that's a big part of it, right? I mean, you have so much time is spent not doing the key things because we have to focus on transactional and frankly, somewhat tedious work associated with just generating a purchase order. In a short market or a disrupted supply chain, the company that gets the purchase orders out the fastest, the one that's going to buy up the supply. Look at microchips, company that prepaid, scooped up all the microchips out there and put the other auto companies out of business, right? So that's happening more and more in these disrupted supply chains and short markets, where procurement, it can be a strategic weapon, as in the automotive example. And if you don't do it well, it can also be a killer. So it's something that's a priority for every C-suite now, is to get their house in order as far as procurement stands. And if you're flying alone, if you're, you don't have a map, you don't know where you're going, you're not sure what the next step is. We have a ton of resources and white papers on our website, different case studies, different categories, different industries, specific examples of how people have used this predictive procurement orchestration to predict, prioritize, and produce great results. And it's something that we're frequently talking about as a trusted advisor to our core customers. So if that's something that interests you, my advice to any procurement or supply chain professional listening is to do your own research. Don't take anything I've said at face value. Of course, examine the facts, but to try experimenting with technology. Because having used spreadsheets like yourself, Melissa, and worked long hours, long weeks, there is a better way. And once you see it, it's incredible.
Yeah. For me in this conversation, I think what really hit home for me was you've spent 3 years building the tool. You really focused on pulling the data in, following the right data governance for cognitive technologies, going back retrospective through the data to validate these results. Because a lot of times when we talk about AI, it's automatically, is this trustworthy? Are the decisions that being made from your tool at a level of confidence that me as the user is going to believe today, tomorrow, and a month from now when I use the tool? So for me, this conversation, I think, really highlighted the amount of time and effort that you and your company have put together in the last 3 or 4 years before you even brought it to the market. And I think that's another, a strength of behind the story. It makes, I think anybody listening to this would feel much more comfortable now about your tool if maybe they had some reservations early on.
Well, Melissa, I appreciate that. I appreciate the questions you've asked, and it's been a fun conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Do you have any other words of wisdom as we wrap up?
I would just say, and this is not, by the way, a particularly original insight, but it's something I do love to share.
Yeah.
Just because something been done some way for a long time doesn't mean that's the right way to do it. There's a lot of things there are a lot of things that are long-standing mistakes reinforced by repetition that are simply suboptimal, inefficient, or broken processes as far as delivering on the results that we all want. So, if you're not iterating, if you're not challenging yourself, if you're not challenging your team to go out and find better ways of doing business, it's a fast-paced world out there, and you might get eaten alive. So keep changing, keep experimenting, keep trying, keep testing.
Perfect. All right, lovely. Thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Melissa.
Mm-hmm.